Hey, so hello and welcome back, and today we'll be going over, this is going to actually be a fairly short video, talking about the Cotton Belt, or as it was formerly known, the St. Louis and Southwestern Railroad. This is going to be really brief, because the history of the Cotton Belt is not really long. It's not a very interesting railroad, and we'll get into a little caveat about that at the end. And it also doesn't have a whole lot of passenger trains, and when we get to the map, we'll see about that. And if you are new to the channel, because I know sometimes I do get new viewers with these videos, I don't go through every nitty-gritty detail about the various paper railroads that led to the creation of a larger railroad, but I do mention some of them briefly or in passing. So I won't be going through like every little paper railroad that created the St. Louis and Southwestern. I'll just be hitting the bigger highlights, but even if I did go through the nitty-gritty details, it's still not going to be a very long video. So we're really just going to be getting into this. This is going to be, again, probably under 10 minutes when it's all said and done. You know, you'll see the end product. I don't always get to see it, you know, in making. So the origin of this railroad is the Tyler Tap Railroad, which was originally chartered to connect Tyler, Texas, with the TNP mainline to the north. Eventually, the town recruited James Paramore of the St. Louis Cotton Compress Company to build a railroad to ship his cotton products into Texas, and this led to the organization of the Texas and St. Louis Railroad, which got permission to operate in Missouri and Arkansas as time went on. The right-of-way construction in Arkansas only cost $75,000. Actually, wait, no, that was the purchasing of the land, I believe. Sorry. And the operations were largely overseen by a man named Samuel Fordyce of Hot Springs, Arkansas. Construction was started in several places along the right-of-way between Birds Point, Missouri, and Texas. This was done to reduce the number of delays that would occur due to bad weather. From what I understand, at least from my experience of being in Tennessee, it rains a lot in certain times of the year in the South when it would normally not rain, at least if you live in other parts of the United States. So, yeah, rain's not fun to build stuff in, especially if your ground turns to mud and stuff starts sinking. So I can't imagine like building in the South, especially a heavy railroad with not a lot of technology, is fun or easy, especially if it rains. And the rail was imported from Wales at the cost of $75 per ton for 35-pound rail. And to clear this up, because I don't always explain what this means every video, this means that the rail weighed 35 pounds per yard of track. And the ties were made of white oak, which was available in the area. And the railroad was also built to 3-foot narrow gauge rather than standard gauge. And I don't remember if I exactly remember that not mentioned when this was built. This is like, I believe, either just after the Civil War or pre-Civil War. Sorry if I didn't write down the exact time period of this in my notes, but again, it was either like right before or right after the Civil War, so we hadn't really standardized to standard gauge yet. So that came, I think, during or after Reconstruction. It was generally after this point in history. Anyways, the next major change to the railroad would come in 1886 when the company was reorganized into the St. Louis, Arkansas, and Texas Railway. And this was done by the bondholders, and only one management team existed to run the railroad. And as mentioned in past videos, when dealing with Texas, is that railroads operating in Texas were forced to have a Texas-based subsidiary until the mid-20th century. So back before the Staggers Act and several subsequent and previous railroad acts, the states could also subject the railways to any stupid laws and regulations they wanted to. And this was also at a time when they regauged the railroad to standard gauge, so late 1880s. And after this was done was when they started building the branches to Little Rock, Shreveport, and other little like bits of little stuff here. I can actually just point at the map with Mobius. So Little Rock is up here where the arrow is. They built that spur down to Shreveport, and then they just kind of started spidering out along the line. And more or less, this is when the Cotton Belt that we know today, or knew today, came into existence. And also in this time period, they started absorbing a bunch of short lines also to spider outwards. And they went through a bankruptcy and reorganization in 1891, so about 6 years later. And this is what reorganized into the St. Louis and Southwestern, which was incorporated in both Missouri and Texas, because again, Texas had to have its own subsidiary because state laws and whatnot. And I also am going to note on this, I don't understand why they would even like maintain an out of Texas subsidiary or have a subsidiary in Texas instead of just being based in Texas and just running outside. I'm assuming other states also had similar laws to the one Texas had that had and made them have subsidiaries in other states. Would not surprise me if that was also the case in some of the states around Texas, or maybe Texas just wasn't prestigious enough to be the base of a major railroad, so they just didn't want to. They'd rather be a St. Louis company that just happens to have a Texas subsidiary instead of a Dallas-based company that just operates up to St. Louis. It would not surprise me given the way business culture worked back then, even to this day to some extent, if they just didn't want that like image of we're a Texas company, they wanted to be a St. Louis company. Would not surprise me at all. And the Southern Pacific also, again, because this is, again, an SP subsidiary, and we'll get into the caveat about that at the end of the video, it didn't come into the picture until 1919. At that point, the Southern Pacific and the Cotton Belt started running through trains with each other, and in 1930, the SP realized that it would need its own route in the region, so it filed with the ICC to start buying interests in the Cotton Belt. And the SP would be allowed to purchase the Cotton Belt, the St. Louis and Southwestern, by issuing one Southern Pacific share for every 3 St. Louis and Southwestern shares, or 3 SP shares for every 5 St. Louis and Southwestern shares of preferred stock. And in 1932, when the transaction was finalized, the Southern Pacific would end up owning 85% of the St. Louis and Southwestern, and they would remain a largely autonomous subsidiary within the Southern Pacific system, with the SP slowly buying up more and more of the outstanding shares, and eventually the SP would own, I think, something like 98% of the company. And in its 60 years under SP control, it eventually would get the Rock Island's Golden State route from Tucumcari to Kansas City, as well as the connection to St. Louis from Kansas City. And in 1992, it was formally incorporated into its parent Southern Pacific and ceased to exist as a railroad. So now we're going to get into the passenger services along the St. Louis and Southwestern. The St. Louis and Southwestern was not a railroad known for its passenger trains, to put it bluntly. It was one of the few railroads to not extensively modernize its fleet in the Streamline era. And according to some of the forums that I had to read through for some of this research, is that they only owned 10 Streamline passenger cars, and I think they all were coaches built by Pullman and were all out of service by 1959. And the 2 main trains on the Cotton Belt were the Lone Star and the Morning Star. And according to the 1936 Southern Pacific System schedule, the Lone Star ran overnight between Dallas and Memphis with a connection to Shreveport and at times St. Louis. And the Morning Star did run all the way to St. Louis with a section to Memphis and I think Shreveport at one point. I can't really confirm or deny the last one because the Cotton Belt schedules tended to move around a lot. Like they were not like many other railroads of the time period where they just had like their one set premier train. They may have reused the name, but where they went kind of shuffled around periodically. And there was at one point a through train to Chicago over the Chicago and Eastern Illinois Railroad. So again, this railroad changed a lot. Like it was not a very constant in passenger trains. And this right here is an ad for the Morning Star, the Pride of the Cotton Belt, which was its train name. It was an ultra-modern air-conditioned diner with a diner and lounge. Basically, from what I understand, it's like the only Streamline train, and it had connections east on the Tennessean as part of the Southern Railway. Because again, it was not the biggest railway, and at Dallas they had connections to the rest of the SP system. And this right here is actually a picture of the Morning Star. It did use the daylight paint scheme for a while with the Alco PAs and had heavyweight equipment. And I believe on the end, if you can see some lightweight equipment, this is probably, I'm guessing, a mail train. I'm assuming they still ran some mail trains at some point in their history. But the Cotton Belt was not a railroad that really believed in its passenger trains, and there were a lot of trains that operated system, largely branch line operations with, I'm assuming, motor cars or mixed trains. But other than like the Morning Star and the Lone Star, or what was it, Morning Star and the other one, Lone Star, I believe, which were sort of quasi premier trains, but they do cut it back, reshuffle it, do a lot of things with it. And at some point, there even wasn't a through train from Dallas to St. Louis. So when the Depression came and the SP took over, they never really cared to jump onto the streamline craze, and the SP, from what I can tell, never really pushed them to either. Because again, I don't know, the SP also had kind of a strained relationship with its passenger trains too, so it's not like they probably would have cared if like some distant subsidiary that they don't interact with very often would be streamlining and building full-on daylights. They could have, but the SP just didn't care. And this led to them cutting their passenger trains in 1952, with all of them gone by 1959. In a way, this is kind of a continuation of the SP regional trains in Texas video, but since it's a different company, it made sense to kind of separate it out because it also does get its own history. And this is also where we kind of get into the caveat. So I got this comment on the, what's it called? The video where I talked about like the Grangers as like a business case study that was like an hour and a half long. And someone mentioned, like, why didn't I talk about the Chicago Great Western? This reason right here, the Cotton Belt picture, or Cotton Belt video, is kind of why I didn't. Like, if the Cotton Belt wasn't a part of the SP, I would not have made this video, frankly. And eventually, when I, probably later in 2022, when I start doing, like, a cleanup of, like, topics and railroads that I didn't talk about when I was earlier in the channel and didn't know what I was doing, I might talk about the Chicago and Great Western, along with like the Northwestern Pacific and a few other issues. Like I want to talk about Phoenix, Arizona's Union Station, regional services in Northern California, eventually the San Diegan. Those will eventually just kind of get done as a cleanup like later in the year, and I'll probably talk about the Chicago and Great Western along with them. But because Chicago and Great Western was also kind of in a similar position as the Cotton Belt, but it was never really part of a bigger system until the Chicago Northwestern absorbed them with the express reason of dismantling them. I never really felt a reason to talk about them. So basically, again, like I said, if this Cotton Belt was not a part of the SP, this video would not be getting made, which is why I'm putting this caveat in and teaser for future videos whenever I actually go through and plan out what I'm doing in the fall. And who knows if I'll have the time, because student teaching. Anyways, I hope you did enjoy, and we'll come back for the next one. And, do the YouTube things, the commenting, the subscribing. Thank you for all the people who are subbing. At the time of recording this, I'm over 600 subs, pushing up to 700. So thank you for being here and commenting and continuing to watch. I really should do a more formal video. But, again, we will see where time takes us because, well, yeah, time makes fools of us all. Anyways, I will see you in the next video, and just thank you for being here. Bye.